Job ter Haar is a cellist and artistic researcher. He is a professor of cello at Bern University of the Arts in Switzerland. He received his PhD in 2019 from the Royal Academy of Music in London. His dissertation, which is linked down below, investigates the playing styles of Alfredo Piatti, 19th-century virtuoso. As a leading cellist and authority in 19th-century performance practice, Job stands out among today's musician scholars with 19th-century specialisms by his ability to intimately connect performance and research thanks to his top-notch artistic and scholarly qualifications and expertise in performance research methodologies. His constant immersion in the world of performance is visible internationally in frequent professional appearances, including with the Ives Ensemble and the Archduke Ensemble. Links are down below. Job ter Haar has extensive teaching experience in cello performance, chamber music, and artistic research. Prior to his appointment in Bern, he taught at Codarts Rotterdam in the Netherlands. His artistic research crosses fascinating disciplinary lines and methodologies as it is positioned between embodiment research, historical contextual investigations, archival research, work around performance treatises, and reenactment. I view Job ter Haar as my cello-playing brother in the 19th century world. As we spoke, I could see Alfredo Piatti and Joseph Joachim, who were friends and long-term string quartet partners, smile down on us from some sort of otherworldly realm. Please enjoy this interview with cellist, artistic researcher, musicologist, pedagogue, and 19th century historical performance practice authority, Job ter Haar. Nice to speak with you today, Job. And the first question is, what drives you when you play or in your practice? And how do you engage with those ideas in your practice and in your research?
Yes, I think rather than ideas, it's more a need that I feel that drives me. And then it's a strong need to connect to others with sharing musical experiences. That's basically it. So from that need, everything else follows. So it's why I do research, because it helps me become a better musician. And it's also why I help others doing research. So as you may know, I have three main areas where I'm active. I'm a performer. I teach research and I teach cello. So those are the areas where I'm active. And in all cases, it's this need that I feel to share music, basically.
It's fascinating. You're a little bit like me. I also teach violin. I also do individual project and artistic research. I teach musicology. So it's really interesting when you teach so many things. I really like it. Do you like it?
Yes, very much. Yeah, I would not like to miss any of the activities that I'm engaged in currently.
What does it mean to be a performer in your own body and in your own experience and in your own world?
Yeah, that is for me basically the same question as the first one, in the sense that if I want to satisfy this need to connect to others by sharing music, it comes with a kind of responsibility. When people pay me to do this, which happens, it's called a concert. So then I have a responsibility towards my audience to do my job properly. So that means that everything I do, I have to optimize. That means I have to train my body. I have to work on my knowledge, on my abilities as a performer. So that seeps through to every aspect of music making. So it's a sense of responsibility that I feel towards my audience, and if I'm teaching to my students, and if I'm doing artistic research towards the community.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Like, I love this idea of responsibility. It carries for me a high degree of integrity. So, you know, you get a gig, you sign up for it, and then you do all the steps that will later make you happy with the result.
So it has very simple technical aspects. I have to be able to move my fingers in a decent way. I need to behave on stage in a way that people are invited to listen to music. I need to choose the repertoire. I have to interact with other musicians in such a way that something beautiful happens at that moment. So it's a very complex task that we have as performers.
The third question is, what publication or book could you recommend to the artistic research communities? Self-promotion encouraged.
Yes, this really depends on the kind of research people are doing. So it's almost impossible to give a general answer to that, but I'll give two, because in the light of what we were just talking about, I think reflection is the core of artistic research. So there are some good publications about reflection, and I would recommend all artistic researchers to start from there. But I think it's the core of what we do as musicians. If we don't ask these fundamental questions and ask very practical questions all the time in the process, then we get lost.
Because you are a Piatti scholar and you have done a lot of work on Piatti, I would like to know how that work that you do in the 19th century, what meaning does that bring to you as a cellist? And if you could tell me a little bit about this in this direction.
Yes. So what I tried to do with my Piatti research was to create a kind of an inner teacher modeled after Piatti, and of course modeled after the real teachers that I had in the past, which were a great help to me. But I noticed that learning from past experiences and knowledge isn't that easy if there's no direct link. If you can't call someone up and ask, hey, how do I do this? How do I learn this? And it's how we learn as musicians. We learn directly by either listening or getting lessons, or of course everybody reads every now and then, but that is a more complicated way of learning. And I feel that when I'm involved in historically informed performance practice, I need to translate all that knowledge into a layer that I can understand in a more intuitive way. And a good teacher does exactly that. So they show how it's done. They explain why, if they're good, or they make you realize that one way or another. Some people don't explain and they get away with it. I tend to explain a lot when I teach. Anyway, they pass on experience and knowledge in a very direct way. And this aspect to me was missing in historical performance, not only in my own practice, but also in that of others. That becomes a theoretical endeavor. As a result, a lot of research that has been done about historical cello playing was kind of broad. It's about general practice. They did this, they played like that. And I wanted to be very specific. So I'm not interested in how they played. Of course, I'm interested, but in the scope of my research, my doctoral research, I was not interested so much in general practice. So I wanted really to focus on one particular cellist who was undoubtedly a great figure, an important figure, connected to important composers of the time, who had a long, brilliant career, well-documented career also, so that I would not be lacking in resources. But we don't, so that Piatti was a great candidate for that. But the problem is we have no recordings of him. So I had to rely completely on reviews of his concerts, on his own output, his written texts, some treatises, some methods, and mostly on his musical output. So his cello parts, I basically studied all his fingerings and bowings. So in short, that was my project, and it worked. So I now have a kind of a voice inside my head that is you can compare it. Are you into Star Trek?
I wish, but
okay, no. So for people who are into Star Trek, there is a scene in one of the it's in Voyager, I think, yes, where the captain of the starship wants to do something creative, and they recreate a hologram in the form of Leonardo da Vinci with all his knowledge, and it's fake, of course, it's generated by computer, but he's interactive, and she gets lessons from him. And of course, the lessons are about much more than just art, and at some point it goes out of hand, and that's science fiction, of course. But something like that I did on the inside. So I now have the disposal, apart from an inner Ander Bijlsma, who was my beloved teacher for many years, and many other teachers that I had, they're sort of internalized. And now there is another voice, Piatti. I can say that I studied the cello with Alfredo Piatti, I think. Of course, it's a translation. Things must have gone lost in translation. But it's the beauty of artistic research, I think, is that it's, as long as it's clearly helpful for me, if it enables me to become a better artist, it's not so much of a problem if it's not completely true. And that's a big difference with musicology, of course. Some of the knowledge, I had to fill in a lot of gaps. We have to be honest about that. When we are engaged in historical performance, we do that anyway. And before you know it, you're cherry picking. And I'm not against cherry picking, but I rather pick the cherries in such a pattern that they align with the other cherries that I have picked, so that it's consistent at least.
Yeah, so that sounds fantastic. So is it right that within the broad umbrella of artistic research, in your own practice and performance, you are inspired by direction that comes from historical performance practice, but you bring that together with artistic research and with some of the also newer ways to look at what research can do for a performer that we really didn't have maybe 50 years ago. Some of the things that you said, they reminded me of this embodied knowledge, like when you know every fingering that Piatti did, it's like you're kind of in your mind going into his body. And the way that you talked about Piatti being your teacher, that's very hypothetical and cannot be like in reality. But if you look at the book, Elizabeth Le Guin Boccarini's Body, which I'm sure you know, it's like you actually are with that person in the past as an artist. When you know so intimately every number they wrote about the notes and every note and every dot and every whatever, and like the way that you've played all this music, you know how it feels, you know all the little manners and mannerisms, and so is this something that one could say that historical performance practice and artistic research, they are kind of married in what you do? Or how do you describe your kind of methodologies if you look at artistic research right now and the many different corners that it has?
The embodiment is really important. And in my work as a research coach at Codarts Rotterdam, it's an important aspect of what we do. It is not enough to know what Piatti did in certain circumstances. You have to experience it yourself, and by doing so, you're much better equipped to fill in some gaps that may remain in the knowledge. And also, you need to do this in order for this knowledge to become useful for you. So embodiment is it's essential. So I always say, so knowledge gets disembodied and our job is to re-embody it. So a very good way that has become very popular now is reenactment, for instance, of old recordings. That is very helpful. For a while, that was maybe taboo because we had this idea that we had to be original, and it would be dangerous to emulate the playing of others. I don't feel that's very much the case, as long as you're clear about your goals when you're reenacting. Some people are reenacting Elvis for a living, and then the result is the goal, of course. But for reenactment in historical performance, the goal is to gain knowledge and to re-embody knowledge that you can use in many different ways. So in my own research, I didn't have that luxury. I did some reenactments of students of Piatti, but it was not a big part of my research because, yeah, I was really interested in Piatti himself, and there are no recordings. He could have made them, but apparently he was not interested, or it didn't happen somehow. And so I had to work with lots of parts and scores and reviews.
But that also gives so much food for the imagination, reading in those old sources. And sometimes I am very happy that there are not more recordings, because I really love reading the reviews. Yep. And I love making my own picture about how did it sound according to the reviews.
Yes, I'm not sure if I did this consciously, but I think it's a nice challenge actually to have historical recordings. And on the other hand, Piatti as a historical figure is close enough to the recorded area, the area of recording. You can sort of test some of your hypotheses by listening to early recordings. So for instance, if you know that Joseph Holman, the Dutch cellist from Maastricht, he was the only one who, in reviews, one of the few cellists who was compared favorably with Piatti. When they write about other cellists, it's always, yeah, it's nothing, he pales in comparison to Piatti. Or, yeah, maybe if he goes on like this, he can once reach this level. But only a few cellists were really on the same level, considered to be on the same level as Piatti. And Joseph Holman was one of them. So it's interesting to listen to his recordings in that respect. And they're pretty good. They're, yeah, really excellent. So, and then we have to take into account that he was quite old when he recorded, and he was probably not at his prime. And it's all very indirect, but it gives us sort of an idea of the quality of Piatti's playing. So that's one of the ways that early recordings were useful. Another way was considering Piatti's students, because they, just like me, they were incorporating certain elements of Piatti's playing in their own playing, very much like I take over certain things from Bijlsma. And of course, it's very dangerous to extrapolate, and you have to be really careful, because if you compare my Bach recordings to Anna's, it's a world of difference. You wouldn't recognize the lineage of Bijlsma. But for some aspects, it was really useful. So, for instance, Hugo Becker also had classes with Piatti informally, and the way he treats chords is very interesting. So he often doesn't break them. He plays them 3 strings at a time, and when there's a 4-string chord, he plays the bottom note as a very short grace note. So to give the impression that all 4 strings sound at the same time. I was wondering where he learned that, in how far that was a tradition, a German tradition perhaps, or if Piatti was also doing that. And in Piatti's cello parts, I found a lot of indications that this is actually the way he was treating lots of chords, but that didn't tell me how it would sound. And then I was very happy that we have this one recording of Hugo Becker where he plays his own minuet with chords, and he's clearly doing it exactly the way as he describes in his method, and that looks very much like some of the chords that Piatti writes in his music. So
it's fascinating. I mean, all of this knowledge that you have, it must be so enriching. And I see why you said earlier that your research makes you a better musician. And I love that, because I also think that my research makes me a better musician. But sometimes people look at me like I don't know, I'm not making sense when I say that, because they're like, how can something like research that's, you know, includes a lot of reading, reflecting, and so on, how can that have to do with expression and those kinds of things that you need as a musician? But for me, it's like a journey that definitely makes me a better musician.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, we can research expression. It's very simple.
And so I have one more question, because you teach at Codarts, and the level of artistic research at Codarts is well known, and they're really good students. There's a debate in the countries that are doing the best artistic research, such as the Netherlands, and in Belgium and in Scandinavia. There's also excellent artistic research, and Austria. There's a debate. What is the role of just standard traditional research methods and also standard traditional modes of dissemination? So, you know, a lot of text written by the student, and a lot of, you know, thinking about topic narrowing, abstract, bibliography, literature review. How do you do your analysis? How do you collect your facts? And then you analyze your facts. What conclusion will you come to? And then you have to write everything up. I mean, of course, at Codarts, you surely do, with every research project, artistic research, there's performance, definitely. But what I'm wondering is, even the accompanying document, even the research portions that still are there, do you see any way how the future might show some possibilities with less of those research skills that need to be learned and less of writing texts, et cetera, et cetera? So I'm wondering how you stand personally, or in your experience as a teacher, how do you stand towards those questions when one hears, for example, in Scandinavia, that some artistic research is done without that, only at the instrument and only disseminated in sound and in recording? And I'm sometimes reflecting about that. So I wonder if you have anything you can share with me about this.
That's very complex. And I think I would like to first separate methodology and dissemination, just for, I mean, of course, they're very much connected, but in this discussion, I think it's good to separate them. When it comes to dissemination, we are very much on the move at Codarts. We came from a little bit of a traditional point of view, so we ask all our students to write a written part, a report, where they describe what they have done. And I think that is essential, because if I see someone perform in a certain way, I can sort of guess that there is research behind it, or in some cases I can be sure. But that doesn't help me reproduce that knowledge if I'm interested in doing so. And I think that is part of the responsibility as a researcher, to make your research accessible, and not only the results. Of course, it's fine if people do research that helps them become better musicians. That's perfect. But in an academic context, and if you do a master of music, I think you're in an academic context, it's more than that. It's also not repeatability, because it's about artistic things, but it's important to allow others to go through the process that you went through. And because people learn from that. If I'm reading someone's research, I'm not only interested in the results, but I'm also very much interested in the way how they got there, the methodology, the reflections, the personal artistic journey. So I think for me that's essential, and that is why I think also at Codarts this will always be there. Having said that, there's a lot lacking in the traditional, more scientific ways of dissemination, because it misses the results of the research. So at Codarts, it's at the moment you have this written part, but embedded in this written part are videos usually, or audio recordings of composers, its scores, and hopefully recordings of performances. Yeah, that you can access from the written text. Yeah, that show the artistic results of the research process. And at the same time, we are still looking for ways to integrate that more, because the better this integration is, the more useful it is for others to read. If I read a whole text, and it can be really good, and then see a performance, I still may not have all the connections. So we are looking for more intimate ways to interconnect the written part and the performance part. And maybe in the end, the written part is not necessary. You can also explain things on video. I don't think that adds, well, that may add something, but it also makes other things more complicated, like quoting, things like that.
I really enjoyed your very pedagogic description of everything that you just said, and I learned so much from you. And so I'm very fascinated by what you say, that with the written component, you really allow others to trace your steps, and you can also be much more precise in writing exactly what went on in your research, some of which one can hear, some of which one cannot hear. So these are some really excellent reasons that make me think that it is probably worthwhile to continue fighting with what it takes to teach conservatory trained excellent instrumentalists the research methods, that because the more they become fluent in expressing themselves also in writing, I think the more nuanced maybe their thinking can also be, entering a more complex and more high level relationship between these worlds of practice and theory that we are bringing together.
Maybe eventually the written part is not strictly necessary. Maybe there are other ways of making this process accessible. I really enjoy working with the vocal leadership students. Have you heard of vocal leadership?
No, but
it comes from Scandinavia. It's a way of choir leading, which puts more responsibility into the choir members. And so it's very interactive, and it's my favorite group. It's all very much into practice what they're doing. So their methodology is very much based on experiments. They do the research in their professional practice. They are all choir leaders. They are professional choir leaders. So they have weekly rehearsals with their choirs, and that sort of makes the backbone of the research methodology. So you have this sort of a spiral of experimenting and learning from that and designing your next step, which to me is absolutely fascinating. And you can document that very much with video. Yeah, and of course there is also data collection feeding into that feedback loop. So at some point you don't know how to proceed, and then you have to read a book or ask someone with experience, do an interview, or listen to other choirs who are doing the same thing. And so then you do some more traditional data collection, which you can then use in your next rehearsal to do an experiment, to try something out. And that process can be documented to a great extent with video, and a good video, and we like to annotate these videos. so that it's still some text there, because when you see these people at work, it's so fluid, you don't always know what they're doing. And if they just give a few keywords, here I'm doing this exercise, that helps enormously. So I'm very much interested in those kind of methods for this dissemination.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely fantastic. I will look this up, and it reminded me also about something that you said at the very beginning, how much you value community. So the way how you described this choir and the leadership and the kind of, I don't know, it sounded pretty open in the kind of concept of leading. It reminded me of what you said earlier, that really community is very important in what you do, and sharing. And it's very interesting how, you know, that is all maybe changing a little bit to the better in the world of music.
Yes. Yeah.
I think we have done a fantastic interview, and you have inspired me so much. I cannot thank you enough, because the way that you have experience in teaching at a high-level artistic research institution is absolutely coming through, and that was such a gift speaking with you.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm sure we will have some other conversations in the future.